This is an unscripted, it might be generous to even call it a rant, going through chapter by chapter of Infinite Jest. It's a very deep rabbit hole. Proceed at your own peril. I'm going to do my best to tie everything in and give good commentary. But at the end of the day, these are just my candid opinions and thoughts on Infinite Jest. And there may even be a fair amount of venting in there. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read the book or tried to have read the book, please go try to forge your own path through it. I really do think it is so relevant to our times. Everybody should give this book a go through. Like, I don't think the author would appreciate me doing what I'm doing and trying to summarize it, as futile as that may be. I really think the book is meant to be struggled through. It's meant to be wrestled with. In some ways, I feel like this is kind of the readers who have done that coming back and commiserating around a campfire and at least coming together and trying to put back the pieces of their life after having tried to understand this book. So thank you again, and hope you enjoyed the video.
We are going to be analyzing Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and we're going to be putting together a sort of guide for each of the chapters. So a big part of this book is the issue of paradox or double bind. Right off the bat in the first chapter, how one of the main characters is trying to get into this college, right? And then it becomes clear that he can't speak. There are allegations by the staff from this college that, you know, he only got into the college because he is the son of the headmistress. We have him, I guess, kind of self-conscious or self-absorbed or neurotic. And I would say the big theme of the first chapter is that Hal has trouble talking, right? Which, again, if we think about the theme of paradox and double bind, this is a kid who says go to the library and step on it. His mom is some grammarian expert, and yet he cannot converse. Like, one of the broader themes of the book is that his father makes this movie to help him talk. And then there's also implications that Hal's father's father had trouble talking to him, and we'll get into that later. But the big part of this first chapter, it sets up Hal as a lexical genius, great athlete, which again is kind of that whole paradox thing. Maybe just irony would be a better word. Right in the middle of this chapter, we get the why as to why Hal has trouble speaking, or at least we get a clue. Call it something I ate, page 10. And then we get this memory of him coming out into the yard and showing Orrin and his mom this mold that he ate under the house. And we can get into more of the character of the mom later, but just note how she reacts, right? She just kind of freaks out and she runs in a circle around the lawn. And then we jump back into the text and we have this sort of inner monologue where none of the administrators for the school Hal is trying to attend understand what the hell he's saying. He's making like sub-mammalian sounds. And this first chapter is actually the end of the book. So he gets dragged into the bathroom. You know, his Uncle Tavis is trying to implore the administrators to let him go. They're freaked out at him basically trying to speak. So it's kind of funny. And I think that sets up the big theme here of the double bind. And also it introduces Hal. So one more thing here is that we get also a clue of where Hal is at, which is going to be Arizona. And I think the location specifically of Arizona, Boston, Massachusetts, and Quebec, these three locations are key. We get a clue. Not for nothing did Orrin say that people outdoors here go from one air-conditioned room to another. And so Hal's taken out on a stretcher. Everyone's freaking out. The very last bulk of text here ending the chapter sets up a lot of the end is the beginning here. Or I should say the beginning is the end. And we have jets rolling overhead. In this futuristic time, Quebec is trying to reclaim land. America has basically become Canada as well.
So this is the conflict here, and the book begins in medias res. But this is Wallace subverting tropes of storytelling. Like in every Hollywood movie, the movie starts at the heart of the action. But as we know later on, that this is the end of the book, right? So there are jets flying overhead. Hal is on a stretcher, unable to speak, and Infinite Jest, the movie that Hal's father created to get him to speak, has actually kicked off this international conflict where, the film is so irresistibly entertaining that it has actually become a weapon that the Quebec separatists have presumably obtained and are now using it in this international conflict. These are the stakes of Infinite Jest. This is what we want to figure out the rest of the novel. There's some argument that it's impossible to figure out exactly what happened. Wallace said that there are certain things you can kind of project from the narrative. I've read many of the theories online, and I have some of my own, but we got to get there. Anyways, in terms of communication, I think this also signals how some things can't be spoken about, or they have the potential for violence. And then conversely, with respect to addiction, which is another half of this book, with addiction and mental illness, talking about it is really the first step towards a cure. I don't think that's a hot take there. I think a lot of people would say talking openly about where you're at and what you're thinking is the first step towards a cure. So with respect to this movie, which was designed to get Hal to talk, to get him out of his shell, and has now set off this international conflict, once again, we're left in a double bind. And much of the rest of the book elaborates on this dilemma, leaving us with the question if we can understand it or anything at all. And where does that leave us from there?
Okay, so the next chapter that we are given here, a guy named Iridi waiting to buy some marijuana. There is this whole paranoia and the trauma he has with smoking pot where he gives it up and then he goes back to it. And it's like this wormhole of anxiety. I think this gets into, again, paradox, double bind. Because essentially, this is all he wants to do, but it's also driving him insane, right? It's like consuming his whole being, just the anxiety of wanting to do pot, but also feeling like it's destructive. And it also relates back to just the entertainment, I guess the double bind of entertainment and consumerism, I guess, in some ways, where you're buying this thing to consume, but then you feel more empty for having done it. There's also an element of him kind of damaging his relationships and his work life. Whenever he buys all this weed, that's all he does. He doesn't want to leave his room. He talks about quote unquote going to the bathroom in a stein. That's what he's using for human waste. Another part of this is where he gets the pot from, which we learn later is where Mildred Bonk is living with her husband Green, I think, with the guy who owns snakes and has a thin mustache. This chapter's long. It's kind of abusively just page after page. It's funny, and generally I think this is just another example of paradox, particularly with substance. In the first chapter, we have how basically why is he so obsessed with language and memorizing the dictionary and stuff like that, right? What is that doing for him in terms of his well-being? So it's another example of our pursuits tend to backstab us, or why is it that we are going after the things we're going after, and what does that mean and say about us? Now we have Hal basically meeting with his dad in disguise, who's pretending to be a professional conversationalist so that they can have a conversation. It's just kind of sad, ultimately. It's funny, but it's also just sad that his father would have to trick him into and dress up in a disguise in order to have a conversation with his son. And we learn later, Hal's dad had a messed up relationship with his own father. Another thing in here is it talks about Hal's mom basically sleeping around with Near Eastern medical attaches, if that's how you say that. And that becomes relevant later. I think that's also part of kind of the sadness of the relationship, is that family should be able to have conversation with each other. This chapter is just an element that that's not the case. I remember listening to articles of David Foster Wallace where he's almost like he doesn't understand how people don't see the book as sad. Most people come away from the book thinking it's really funny. And there are elements that are pure satire. I mean, I would call most of this book very satirical, but behind the curtains, like, this is it's just sad, right? It's like, why can't they just have a normal relationship? What about them, and not even them, but just like humans in general, how do we behave? Like, why can't we just talk openly about things? Why does Hal feel the need to memorize the dictionary? Why does James, his father, who's a really good filmmaker, right? He's very gifted with lighting. I think later on in the book and in the footnotes, it talks about how like a naval research academy like consults with James because he's so good and technical with lighting and appearance. And so it's like they're both using these things, like how it talks about how he's an OED man, right? And he's able to define words from memory from the dictionary, and here James is in disguise, sort of the things he's good at. And they're both playing to their strengths, but there's no sense of really having an open relationship. And then I think later on in the chapter, as James just goes on, it's unclear whether Hal is actually speaking or not, right? Because the reason James made Infinite Jest, which is a movie, was a way to get Hal to speak with him or to get him out of his own world. That's kind of what I got out of this one. Okay, short chapter. Hal wakes up at the break of dawn to go do tennis drills. Mario, his deformed brother, who I think there's a lot of evidence that is the result of Avril, Hal's mom, sleeping with Tavis, Hal's uncle. He sleeps in Hal's room, and I don't know. They have kind of a funny relationship. It ends here. Again, this is a short one. It ends with Oren calling Hal, and there's a lot of evidence that Oren is the one who ships out James's tape, Infinite Jest, across the world to kind of start this war with the Quebec separatist movement. It ends with Hal answering Mario when he asks who wasn't on the phone. He says, "No one you know, I don't think," which I don't know what that really means. I'm not really sure the age difference between Oren and Hal, but I imagine that Oren is not as deeply involved in Mario's life as Hal is. And I don't know if Hal's protecting Mario here, or if it's true when he says that, or if he's just, just trying to get the little guy to go back to sleep. I'm not sure, but it does point to the fact that Oren is basically going through some shit, and he starts calling Hal when he's in that state of mind. And we'll talk more about Oren later, but that was that short chapter. Okay, this next one is again a funny one. So there's this guy. He's basically like a medical assistant to this prince who can't stop eating Toblerone chocolate. And then he has these like weird sores in his mouth. So this guy's job is to, drain the cysts in his mouth from all this Toblerone chocolate he's using. And then when he gets home, like, he needs to unwind, and so he'll watch the teleprompter. And it's all done in a very ceremonious way, where like his unwinding and his entertainment is like this kind of ritual that he and his wife goes through. And so he has to like wind back in his chair, and then he'll fall asleep, like, and then the movie will change to like falling rain. And that's the way he gets by. That's his life. He has his job where he has kind of a disgusting job of looking in this prince's mouth and treating these wounds from him eating chocolate. And then he goes home and he basically veges out in front of the TV. But on this night, his wife is away, and he puts in a tape that is mailed to him. We later kind of realize Oren has mailed him this tape, because as we talked about in a few chapters ago, or a couple chapters ago, James knows that his wife is sleeping around. I think there's some argument that Oren is trying to get revenge on Avril with all the people she may have slept with. And I don't think this guy slept with Avril. I think there's a lot in here that he and his wife are devout Muslims, I believe. They have a good relationship. So I don't know if Oren's just sending these tapes out willy-nilly or if this guy maybe was unfaithful, but I don't think he was. I think Oren just mailed him this Infinite Jest tape sort of at random, kind of like, this is who my mom's into, and I'm going to mail this tape to all people in this profession. But in any case, he does get the tape and he becomes like catatonic just looking at it, and it's so entertaining or so beautiful. But again, the things that we consume and entertain us like eventually destroy us.